Hey guys, welcome to another episode of The Completionist. For this episode, guys, it is part 2 of your questions and my answers. So anyway, guys, I'm going to try to clue up the rest of the questions in this video, so let's not waste any time and let's get started. Alright, Dinky Dana had one more question to ask, and he asked, what game graphics are my favorite? And he highlights not necessarily the best graphics. Well, my favorite game graphics of all time are the cel-shaded, hand-drawn anime sketches of games such as Valkyria Chronicles. I absolutely love the game graphics for that game because I find that it just makes the environments and the characters look that much more beautiful. And some other anime style games that use that type of graphics are games like Wild Arms 3, Dark Cloud 2, and my personal favorite, Dragon Quest 8. I think Dragon Quest 8 has some of the most beautiful hand-drawn watercolor cel-shaded anime style graphics I've ever seen, and the environments in Dragon Quest 8 just look incredibly beautiful. Alright, and the next question comes from my friend Geeker Days, and he asks, what makes you decide that if a particular game is worth completing making a video for it? And for me, that's just pretty much any game that I play. I consider myself a very patient gamer. And to be honest, I haven't really played a game that I've really despised, that I have no interest in playing it anymore. You know, I plan on doing a video for each and every game that I actually complete, and I haven't really come across a game in which I have no interest in playing anymore. I will give each and every game that I own its due time. So with regards to what makes me decide, ultimately is if I enjoy the game. But to be honest, every game I've played, I found something to enjoy about it. And to me, with regards to playing games, the pros of the game will always outweigh the cons. I guess that's just one of the things of loving the anime game genre, is because no matter what I play, I'll always find something to enjoy about it. Alright, then the next couple of questions comes from the Secret Game Room. And he asks, what is my favorite generation of consoles and games? And I think that's pretty much the fourth generation, because the moment that I really knew that I was a gamer was when I was playing my Super Nintendo. And you know, during high school I just put a lot of time into that system, so much so that the Super Nintendo controller is my favorite controller of all time. I think the Super Nintendo has one of the greatest game libraries of all time, and I just love a lot of the games that actually came out for that system. And you know, some of my best video game memories actually come from the time that I have owned my Super Nintendo. So that's probably my favorite generation of console and games. And his second question is, what is my favorite weapon in any game? And my favorite weapon in any game comes from Valkyrie Profile, and it's a weapon called the Angel Slayer. The Angel Slayer is the strongest sword in the Valkyrie Profile game, but you have to go through hell and high water to actually get it. In order to get the Angel Slayer in the Valkyrie Profile games, you have to go through the extra dungeon called the Seraphic Gate. And the Seraphic Gate is the bonus dungeon in the Valkyrie Profile series, but it is incredibly difficult. And in order to get the Angel Slayer, you have to go through the Seraphic Gate at least 10 times. And beat the final boss of the Seraphic Gate 10 times. But every time you beat the Seraphic Gate, each playthrough of the Seraphic Gates gets harder and harder and harder. So by the time you reach the Seraphic Gate the 10th time, just all the enemies and the bosses are just so overpowered. So it is a tough weapon to get, but it's well worth it to actually get the strongest weapon in the Valkyrie Profile series. The next set of questions comes from my friend Goffman, and he asks, what is my favorite Nintendo produced franchise? And my favorite Nintendo produced franchise is actually not necessarily one of the popular Nintendo franchises like Star Fox and Mario and Zelda. My favorite Nintendo produced franchise is actually Advance Wars. I just think it's just one of those series that I absolutely love. I would love to see another Advance Wars game for a portable system, but I don't know if that's going to come to us anytime soon, but I find, you know, each game in the Advance Wars series brings something new and different yeah, into the series, and like every Advance Wars game I've played, I've actually really enjoyed it, and I think it's one of Nintendo's most underrated franchises, and I wish it would get a lot more attention and a lot more love. Next question he asks is, what is my favorite Final Fantasy character from any Final Fantasy game? And that would be Edgar from Final Fantasy VI, because I just find him such a cool character, and you know you have a cool Final Fantasy character when he used weapons like an auto crossbow and a drill bit and a chainsaw, so you can't get much cooler than that. And his final question is that he asks, what is the rarest game in my collection? And the rarest games in my collection would probably have to be Suikoden 2 for the PS1, Panzer Dragoon Saga for the Sega Saturn, and Skies of Arcadia for the Dreamcast. Alright, and the next question comes from L Cytax L, and he asks, what are my top 10 PS2 games? Now, I don't really have a top 10 list for the PS2 because there's just so many games for the PS2 I have not played yet, so it wouldn't be fair for me to do a top 10 list for that system, but I can give you 10 games for the PS2 I actually really enjoyed. And those 10 games are Final Fantasy X, Dragon Quest VIII Journey of the Cursed King, Odin Sphere, Xenosaga Episode 1, Metal Gear Solid 3 Snake Eater, Wall Arms 3, La Pucelle Tactics, Tales of the Abyss, Valkyrie Profile 2 Silmeria, and Grandia 3. And the next question he asks is, have I ever completed a game that I didn't like? And L Cytax L, yes, there have been games that I have completed that I absolutely despise, and the first game that comes to mind is Lunar Dragon Song for the Nintendo DS, and that game is a horrible, horrible game, and an insult to the Lunar series. It's really bad, it's horribly paced, it has a bad battle system, and just everything about the game felt tired and monotonous, and it wasn't very much fun to get through. But I am grateful that I have completed the game, so I never have to touch it again. But stay away from Lunar Dragon Song, it's not that great of a game. Alright, and the next question comes from Hitomi Love, and he has 3 questions. And his first question is, other than Xenogears, what would my second favorite game be? And my second favorite game would have to be Blast Corps for the N64. I just absolutely love everything that that game has to offer. And he also wants to know, are there any games you haven't finished or you just don't have the time to play them, and what games are they? And that's pretty much my entire gaming library. Like, I do have a large backlog of games because I do make the time to complete them. And you know, maybe if I wasn't such a completionist, you know, I'd get through my games a lot faster, but you know, I kind of feel like I owe it to the game developers to, you know, play everything that they actually put in the game, to actually enjoy the game for what it's worth, to make sure that I am getting my money's worth. But right now, you know, I'm trying to complete Rogue Galaxy. I got about 260 hours into it so far, but I had to give myself a break from the game because what I'm doing in that game is the frog log, which is doing all the weapon synthesis, and every character has over 90 weapons that you can make. So that's what I'm in the middle of doing right now. So it can get a little boring and a little monotonous, so I am giving myself a little bit of a break from that game, but I do plan on completing it. And his last question is, what are my favorite Final Fantasy summons? And my favorite Final Fantasy summons are Diablos from Final Fantasy VIII. I just absolutely love that summon. I think the Diablos character is really cool, and when he sends that gravity attack at you, it's just incredibly destructive, and it is my favorite summon from that game. I'm also a big fan of Bahamut Zero from Final Fantasy VII. I just love the fact that this 6-winged dragon comes from space and he shoots this galactic beam down on the Earth at your enemies and causes a whole ton of damage. But I think my favorite Final Fantasy summon from any Final Fantasy game is Alexander. because I just love the concept of Alexander. He's just a big holy mecha that just sends beams of light at you, and he's an incredibly destructive summon, and I just love seeing him in any Final Fantasy game. Alright, and the next question comes from Aldrich, 1988, and he would like to know which 5 RPGs would I recommend for someone who's new to the genre. 5 RPGs I would recommend would be RPGs that have very addictive gameplay, that don't try to tell too complicated of a story, and have a very good pace to it. And those 5 RPGs are The World Ends With You for the Nintendo DS, my favorite Nintendo DS game of all time. Great music, great graphics, great gameplay, and a very good pace to it. Probably the ultimate RPG that every gamer should play at least once, whether you're a fan of RPGs or not, and that's Chrono Trigger. I think Chrono Trigger is a great RPG for anybody to play, because it has a very good pace to it. And despite the story being very good and very meaningful, Chrono Trigger isn't actually a really long game. You can actually beat it in like 20 to 35 hours. But when you're playing the game, it never really feels that it goes by that quick, because it does tell a really good story. So I recommend to anybody who's new into the RPG genre to give that game a try. I would also recommend Final Fantasy VI, which is my favorite Final Fantasy game of all time, just because it has one of the best villains in the Final Fantasy series. It has a ton of characters. It has a very long but very engrossing story that doesn't try to be too complicated. Another game would be The Legend of Dragoon. I think it's a very good, straightforward RPG that tells a really good story, even though the battle system may turn some people off. And the last game would be Lunar Silver Star Story Complete, because I just think that it's a very basic but very adorable RPG. And it just tells kind of a nice, normal RPG story, but it actually has a lot of heart behind it. And you know, it's also another RPG that's not that long to actually beat, and it never feels very long or tedious, so it's actually really enjoyable. So definitely check those 5 RPGs out. Alright, and the next question comes from the old school NYC gamer, and he asked, what was the first game I fully completed when you first started gaming on my first system? Well, the first system I ever owned was the Atari 2600, but I didn't own very many of the Atari 2600 games. And technically, a lot of the Atari 2600 games you can't really fully complete, because a lot of them don't even have an ending. It's all about getting the highest score. And you know, despite me being a completionist, you know, I'll be the first one to admit that, you know, I'm not really good at games, especially when it comes to high score. I'm not really good on going after those high score runs. But with regards to the first game that I've completed, it was probably the original Super Mario Brothers for the Nintendo, because I remember playing that game and knowing all about the warps when I was like 7 or 8 years old. I wasn't really interested in getting through the game as fast as possible. I actually wanted to go through every world and every level to say to myself that I did do everything that that game had to offer. So the original Super Mario Brothers was probably the first game that I fully completed. The next question comes from Mark Figueroa, and he asks, how do I find time to actually complete a game, and how much time does it take to complete a game? Well, how I find time to complete a game is usually, you know, I take any free time that I have, and I usually spend it toward gaming. Because when I start playing a game, I will stay dedicated to it unless I hit a point in which I'm doing something really boring or really monotonous or really grinding. And you know, then I can play it for a few hours, but then I grow a bit bored, a bit wary of it. So when it comes to me completing games, I'm always playing 2 to 3 games at the same time, because if I ever hit a point in a game that's really boring, I just move on to the next game. So I just give myself a break from that game until I'm interested in it again. I will get back to completing it, but at least by playing a couple of games at once, you know, your mind feels refreshed, so that you never really feel bored with one game, and that's how I actually managed to complete them. Now, with regards to how much time do I spend on games, well, it all really depends on the style of game. Like for RPGs, for me to complete an RPG, it will take me at least a minimum of 100 hours. But that time could be significantly less, especially if the RPG is a very short RPG or there's not a lot of stuff to do in them. I have completed RPGs within 20 to 40 hours. Fighting games can take anywhere from 30 to 50 hours. Platformers, we're looking at 10 to 20 hours, and it can go upwards to 50 hours, especially if I have to beat the game on every difficulty or to get every item. And action games such as Bayonetta or side-scrollers or like anything like that, it can take me like 30 to 50 hours, all really depending on the amount of stuff that you need to do in them. Alright, and the next question comes from Brody B101. And he asks, out of all the games I've played, what game has had the best wasted potential? And it's a game that I've already talked about before, and it's just Xenosaga Episode 2. The reason why I feel that that game has had the best wasted potential is that, you know, I just loved everything about the first game. You know, even though everybody's most common complaint about the first Xenosaga game was that the cutscenes were too long, but it didn't really bother me. There was just a lot of things that felt right with Xenosaga 1. I just loved the soundtrack by Yasunori Mitsuda. I really loved the English voice cast of the first game. I thought the battle system was great. I thought the pacing of the game was great. I loved the mini-games in Xenosaga Episode 1. And I really thought, you know, when we got into Xenosaga Episode 2, I was really hoping that, you know, that the game developers would go by saying, if it's not broke, don't fix it. I'd be perfectly content, you know, when they moved to Xenosaga Episode 2 if they kept things the same as Xenosaga 1, but, you know, game developers, they always feel like that they got to reinvent the wheel and do something different, especially if they're doing some kind of trilogy. But there were just a lot of things in Xenosaga 2 that they didn't really need to change, you know. Like I said, like they changed the majority of the English voice cast, they changed the composer, they changed the battle system. The pacing of the game was just really horrible, and you know, because of all the changes that they did to Xenosaga Episode 2, it is the lowest rating out of the entire series. It does have the lowest score out of all three games, and they just really didn't have to change that much with the Xenosaga Episode 2, so that's why I feel that game has had the best wasted potential. Alright, and the next question comes from the R2 Active Thunder Chicken, and he asks, have I ever completed Ghosts and Goblins on the original Nintendo? And the question is no, because I haven't started collecting for the Nintendo yet. I don't even own a Nintendo Entertainment System as of right now, because the Nintendo games are actually fairly easy to come by, especially in my area, so I would rather start collecting for the harder systems before I move on to the original Nintendo. Now, with regards to Ghosts and Goblins, it is a game that I am going to have for the Nintendo, because I do consider the Ghosts and Goblins series to be an anime-style game series, so I will be adding that game to my collection. And even though I know Ghosts and Goblins is infamous for its difficulty, but that's not going to deter me from actually completing that game, so I will eventually get around to it. And the final question comes from Wig Loverful, and he asks, what consoles do I own? Now, I actually do own quite a few consoles, so let me just look at the computer screen so I can name them all. What I own right now is I own a ColecoVision, I own an Atari 2600, I own a Super Nintendo, I own an N64, I own a Sega Genesis, a Sega Saturn, Sega Dreamcast, a PS3, an Xbox 360, an original Game Boy, a Game Boy Advance SP, I own two Nintendo DS's, I own a PSP, a GameCube, a TurboGrafx 16, a Wii, and two PS2s, a fat model and a slim model. So anyway guys, thanks for all your questions, and I hope you guys are more than satisfied with your answers. I've really had fun doing this, and this really wouldn't be successful if it wasn't for you guys, so to each and every one of you, I thank you. So anyway guys, that takes care of another episode of The Completionist, so thanks for doing this Q&A with me. So as always guys, take care, and I wish you nothing but the best. Later.